I may not be the smartest man in the world, but one thing I know with absolute certainty is that when Dana White is calling the shots, when Dana White is your boss and he's at the top of the organization, it doesn't take much to go from hero to zero. Man, it does not take much to irritate that dude, get on his wrong side, and all of a sudden he's got nothing but bad things to say about you. I remember when he was singing Ngannou's praises. I remember when all he could talk about was how Francis Ngannou was the man, he was the next best thing. He was going to take over the division.
He looked incredible tonight. Wow. Yeah, that's as impressive a heavyweight knockout as you will ever see.
It was right after he landed this incredible knockout over Alistair Overeem, an incredibly vicious and violent uppercut, man, that almost tore his head off. I mean, we almost looked at Overeem's head up towards the ceiling. Almost went up towards the rafters in the arena, man. That's how powerful of a shot that was. And after a performance like that, Dana White was singing his praises up and down, talking about how he was going to be the man, and it was easy to see why.
Yeah, I mean, the guy, first of all, when you look at him, he looks like the heavyweight champion of the world. I mean, he looks like the heavyweight champion of something. The guy's a monster. And then, he continues to get better. Yeah, wow. Wow. I mean, I always believed in this guy since I met him. I thought that he was going to be the man, but boy, he looked like the man tonight.
But then in the very next fight, goes out there against Stipe, comes up short, goes out there in another fight that we just attempt to forget for how bad it was, and then goes back on this streak, rattling off impressive knockout victories one after the other. And once again, we see Dana White talking about how Francis Ngannou is the man.
And Francis is next. I mean, he looks incredible.
And I mean, let's be honest with each other. We know that Dana White, as much as he likes to say that he's a fight fan, he's a businessman first. As much as he likes to talk about putting on great fights, and he does, there's a reason he does it. And it's not just because he wants to watch them. It's because it makes business sense. It makes great money. He's in it because he wants to turn a profit. We know that. And one of the other things we know is that Stipe wasn't putting... Stipe was not selling for him, man. As impressive as a fighter as Stipe Miocic is and was, he was not the headliner that Dana White wanted him to be. He was not selling all the seats. He was not generating incredible amounts of buzz. He was just not doing for it financially what Dana White wanted for his heavyweight champion. And he thought that Francis Ngannou was going to be that guy. He looked at Francis Ngannou and he thought, man, this dude is going to sell an incredible amount of tickets. He's going to generate buzz. He's going to get so many people interested in the heavyweight division and by default interested in the rest of the sport. It's going to be a financial bonanza, man. It's going to be a windfall. He saw dollar signs with Francis Ngannou. How could you not? I understand exactly where he's coming from. It made sense to look at it that way if you're looking at things through the lens of a promoter. And then we see Francis Ngannou go out there and win the belt, man. We see him go out there and put on a very impressive performance in the rematch against Stipe. Shows how his skills have evolved, shows how he continues to get better as a fighter. Wins the belt. Comes out with a knockout victory, man. And all of a sudden at that press conference, we're seeing a different tone from Dana White. This would have been the perfect opportunity for him to come out and continue to sing the praises of him. Say, I saw it all along. I knew how this man was going to be champion. He just won the belt. Now we're on to even bigger and better things. Now is when we begin the title reign. Now is when he continues to dominate, but from the top of the mountain instead of climbing the mountain. But in that post-fight press conference, we saw something different. He was singing a little different tune. You could see he was a little bit irritated. You could see that he didn't have quite that same tone.
I can't explain to you guys enough about how it's keeping your head together when you either get the title shot or once you get the title. Yeah, he got a little ahead of himself the first time. Let's see how he handles it this time.
And there's a few things that I found interesting, one of which was he said Francis Ngannou got a little bit ahead of himself, right? Got a little bit too big for his britches in that first run up to the title. Then he got humbled a little and that loss to Stipe. Now we're going to see how he does this time. Now we're going to see how he looks at this time. It's an interesting perspective to take. You have to wonder what he was thinking about. Now, hindsight being 2020, we know what was on his mind. We know that those contract negotiations probably weren't going good. We know that what he thought was going to be an easy ride, what he thought was going to be just a one-way ticket to the bank, probably wasn't going to turn out that way. And Ngannou wasn't going to be so smooth as far as these negotiations were going. He was already seeing that. And then we saw something else that I've thought that just makes me laugh every time now. Classic Dana White. We saw it in that press conference. People were already talking about Ngannou fighting John Jones. I mean, how could you not? We've got John Jones, arguably the GOAT, man. Greatest to ever do it. Incredibly dominated 205. And now we've got Francis Ngannou, a man with this just Mack truck diesel power, capturing people's imaginations. He's run through the division on his way to his belt, defeated Stipe Miocic. Now people are talking about these two guys matching up. Right away that night, they're already talking about it. The fans are buzzing. They're talking about it on the broadcast. And John Jones sends out a tweet. Show me the money. We all know what that means. And Dana White uses this as an opportunity to go back to his classic stance. When guys want to negotiate for more, when guys want to get paid better, when guys want a better contract, Dana White goes out there and basically attacks their manhood and challenges them in the public eye, challenges their manhood. Not directly, but that's basically what he's doing, because what he always says is the same thing. He says, if a guy doesn't want to be here, he doesn't need to be here. If a guy doesn't want to fight at this level of competition, there's a lot of ways that he can take himself out of the discussion. Think about the way he phrases that. If a guy doesn't want to be here, if a guy doesn't want to fight at this level, if a guy doesn't want to fight this caliber of people, there's a lot of ways to take him out of the discussion. He can ask for too much money. He can demand too much, knowing that we won't pay. And in essence, he thinks he gets to keep his status. He gets to keep his reign, his public perception or his public persona. But at the same time, he doesn't have to go out there and fight the fight that he doesn't want to fight. Doesn't have to fight the guy that he thinks maybe he's going to beat him or think maybe he's going to embarrass him. Doesn't have to go out there and do those things.
Listen, I could sit here all day and tell you, what show me the money mean? I tell you guys this all the time. If you can say you want to fight somebody, but do you really want to?
He's trying to insinuate that these fighters are being strategic and taking themselves out of the discussion for fights by asking for too much money, pricing themselves out. And implies the same thing here once again about John Jones. And then right after that, we see Ngannou fight Cyril Gane. And this man, what an impressive performance, but it's after the fight that it becomes very interesting. We see something that we very rarely see, and that is we see somebody other than Dana White put the belt on the champion. Mick Maynard comes out there and does it. Dana White's nowhere to be found. Post-fight press conference, Dana White's nowhere to be found. Very unlike him, and you have to imagine that something's going on. Francis Ngannou is asked about it. He chuckles a little, says he doesn't know exactly what's going on, but he found the whole thing interesting. He was going to ask about it later. Now we know. Now we know, man. I guarantee you Dana White had his fingers crossed, had his toes crossed. He was hoping beyond hope that Cyril Gane was going to win that fight. He did not want his heavyweight champion to be Francis Ngannou. These contract negotiations were probably getting increasingly more difficult. In the post-fight press conference, we saw Francis Ngannou once again talk about how it's not necessarily about the money, it's about the terms of the contract. Things need to be a little bit different. We saw all that. Dana White knew all those things were going to happen. He knew how difficult things were going to be. And now here we find ourselves in January 2023, and once again we see the same tired line from Dana White.
We get to this point where I've told you guys this before. If you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here.
Comes out here, they release Francis Ngannou. They say these contract negotiations can't happen. We offered him the biggest payday ever. We were going to make him the highest paid heavyweight ever. It was even going to be bigger than Brock Lesnar's deal.
He doesn't want to take a lot of risk.
But he walked away from it. And once again, Dana White comes back and says he didn't want to be here. He didn't want to fight at this level of competition. What we do is we put on the best fights in the world between the best fighters in the world. And if a guy doesn't want to do that, a guy goes out and thinks he can make less money, a guy thinks he can make more money fighting lesser competition, then that's what he's going to go out and do. Because right here we've got the best guys. He doesn't want to do that. Again, kind of coming around the back door trying to attack your manhood. Coming around the back door trying to insinuate that you're not who you claim to be. You claim to be the baddest man alive. You claim to be the best fighter out there. Well, that's not the way that he's implying the situation really is. How bogus is that, man? How bogus is that? You go from singing this man's praises, saying that he's the baddest man on the planet, talking about how incredibly scary and dominant he is, talking about putting him up against John Jones, talking about all of the things that he can do. And just like that, you flip it all, imply that he's scared, imply that he doesn't want to be here, imply that he's interested in fighting lesser competition, doesn't want to fight the best in the world anymore. We know what Francis Ngannou was talking about. We've heard him mention it before, and now we heard him detail these things afterwards. the right to sponsorship. And that's huge. That is through the roof. You know, Dana White always used to talk about how getting a major sponsorship deal was something that the UFC needed to do to legitimize itself. It's what the NBA does, the NFL, the MLB. They have these major sponsorship deals with organizations. We need to get one. That's what we need to do forever. That's what you saw. I remember when we used to saw individual fighters had condom sponsorships on their shorts, beef jerky and all kinds of things. But he wanted the major sponsorship deal. So then Reebok comes in. And the fighters get screwed, man. They got such a raw deal when Reebok came in. Yeah, it's a big name and a big deal and all these kinds of things. And I'm sure the UFC was doing great with it. But you know who wasn't doing great? Every single individual fighter. Particularly, the bigger the fighter, the worse off they were doing. Now look, before he became our favorite podcaster, Brendan Schaub used to fight in the UFC. And he was there when that Reebok deal went down. And he spoke out about how bogus of a deal it was for him because he no longer was able to have his individual sponsorships. Reebok took over everything and they were just getting paid opinions. So he came out and he talked about how much money that he was making off of his individual sponsorships. Dana White calls him a liar. He goes on to Joe Rogan's podcast, shows Joe Rogan basically the receipts, his taxes, all these types of things. He was making a killing relative to what he was getting from that Reebok deal. You can imagine what a guy like Francis Ngannou would get. They're still on a bogus deal. The right to sponsorship is huge. The ability to do that is massive. Number two, he was asking for health insurance. Do you think that's uncalled for? Do you think that that's unheard of when we talk about professional sports? Health insurance? He tells us the UFC said no go. That's not the way we do business. And third, he said that he wanted an advocate for the fighters on the board. Somebody who's going to be there with the fighters' best interests in mind when things were being negotiated, when things were being talked about. Now, you can make the argument that he was overstepping his bounds, getting a little bit too big for his britches, negotiating for things that he had no business negotiating for because these were major things. These are the types of things that you would hear a union negotiate for, not an individual person. But man, my hat is off to the man. I have nothing but respect for him for coming out here and bringing these things to the forefront. And not just talking about them. There's a lot of people who talk about them. We see Jake Paul over here fighting boxing saying that ultimately his end goal is to come in and get a union in MMA going. I mean, that's how big it is, right? We hear a lot of people mention these things over the years. But what we haven't seen is a lot of people put their money where their mouth is. We haven't seen a lot of people really step up and take ownership of the situation in the sense that the man walked away from the belt, walked away from the allegedly, I mean, we'll just take it at face value and say that Dana White was telling the truth in the sense that the contract was going to make him the highest paid heavyweight ever, even bigger than Brock Lesnar. Walked away from it all. Said, no, my principles are more important. What I believe in is more important. What I stand for is more important. Now, you can say that he's going to go out and he's going to still make a bunch of money doing other stuff, 100%, and he should. Nevertheless, all of those things have yet to come to fruition. He had a contract right in front of him that was going to make him the highest paid heavyweight of all time. All he had to do was sign his name at the bottom. And he said, no. What I believe in is more important. I think these things are bigger than that. I'm walking away from this, not only because I don't want to be here if my demands aren't met, if these things are still going on. I want to bring light to this situation. I want people to understand where we're going with this. The talks are continually increasing. The pressure is getting applied more and more. We're going to see the day when this union comes in. We're going to see the day when things change. It's not there yet. The UFC as an organization is still underpaying its fighters relative to what you see things like the NFL and the NBA and the MLB and all of these other places pay their fighters. Just when you look at the percentages, they're not getting paid as much. I believe the time will come. The time will come when the fighters will get paid more. The time will come when the fighters will get a better deal. And something like this is huge. You know, and Ngannou comes out afterwards and he's just all class. 100% professionalism. How he presents his case, the way he talks about things. He doesn't come out and badmouth people. He's never been that guy, not that guy now. Doesn't come out and use a bunch of profanity to talk about Dana White or potentially how the deals were going down. I'm sure he wasn't treated with a lot of respect. Nobody has ever come out after not getting a deal done with Dana White and the UFC and said, yeah, we didn't get it done, but it was all above board. It was nothing but respect. They treated me great. We shook hands. We parted as friends. That's not typically what you see. When guys come out and they don't get deals, they talk about how they were mistreated. They were talked to unkindly. Talking about how the man said some not nice things about his mother. No, I exaggerate a little bit, but you get what I mean. And yet through all of that, potentially, allegedly, whatever, Francis Ngannou comes out and presents himself as all class, all professionalism, explains the situation. Can't wait to see what's next for the man. I really do. I wish him the best. Who knows? Maybe we'll see him in a boxing match with Tyson Fury or something crazy like that. Who knows what the future holds? One thing for sure, I'll be tuning in. And another thing for sure, it'll be interesting to see what goes forward and what continues to happen with fighter relationships and the UFC, fighter relationships and Dana White, how this one all trickles down, because this one seems to be getting blown up and bigger than any one that I can ever imagine in the past, and rightfully so. Let me know what you guys think.